now only select people are able to talk now. All right, so I'd like to welcome Bram Cohen, legendary cypherpunk, creator of BitTorrent, and he's been quite active in the Bitcoin scaling debate and a lot about Bitcoin technology. So thank you very much for joining us on our humble Teamspeak, Bram.
Great to be here.
All right, so everybody knows what torrenting is and BitTorrent and stuff. So tell us about how has the technology developed in the past like decade? Are you just maintaining what's already been there, or is there sort of like any exciting developments over the past 13 years or so that it's been around?
Well, BitTorrent's a pretty mature technology at this point. Um, uh, I made it over a decade ago now, and um, mostly BitTorrent Inc. has been maintaining uTorrent, the most popular BitTorrent client, and dealing with some tweaks to the protocol as they've happened. Actually, the most notable thing in a while, well, around 10 years ago is when the DHT got added. So that was a thing that we worked on and improved. And we also added UTP, which is this swap in replacement for TCP, which BitTorrent peers use between each other. The idea there being that you want to like not increase the queuing delay on your router by a huge amount. So that's a protocol with its own congestion control specifically designed to keep that under control. So those are both things that we came up with and rolled out. The most notable thing in the last couple of years that just happened is the SHA-1 break. And so we're having discussions now about what we should do about this. It's not like a super, oh my God, the sky is falling problem for BitTorrent because we use complete hashes instead of half hashes. Um, uh, for integrity checking, and there's no full reversal happening. But still, it's probably a good idea for us to move off of SHA-1, and then maybe we'll tweak some other things while we're at it.
All right, then. So that there's some general overlap in areas between BitTorrent and the technology and cryptography around BitTorrent and Bitcoin itself. Could you tell us a little bit about how they're related and because you got started in something like 2004 and Hashcash was back in the late 90s. So can you talk a little bit about the progression of the technology and how we got to Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, in terms of what they actually do, I mean, obviously the name Bitcoin is an homage to BitTorrent, but what they do under the hood is like completely different. In some ways, they're sort of comically opposites. That like BitTorrent is extremely efficient and does a very, very good job of using up all available bandwidth for really something that's quite useful the whole way through. Where Bitcoin is very, very inefficient. It has, you know, it's something that can run on like a Raspberry Pi pretty easily and maintain that scale of database, and it requires literally warehouses full of computers doing absolutely nothing, burning electricity, in order to run the whole thing. Um, so in that sense, they're very, very different from each other. Um, they are both examples of peer-to-peer crypto protocols, uh, and uh, and I've also uh, and another protocol that I made over the last few years is BitTorrent Live, which is peer-to-peer live video streaming as well. It's really hard to find if you look at the details of what these different protocols do. All three of these, they look very different from each other in terms of under the hood, how they work, what they're optimizing for, things like that. They all do kind of involve crypto stuff, and they all involve peer to peer, and they seem to be all things that my skills are reasonably applicable to uh, in all cases. In terms of the history of Bitcoin, um, There was Hashcash back in the day. I didn't look into it all that much back then. I did wonder at times if it would be possible to do something like that. I mean, fundamentally, the idea is you have a proof of work. This is kind of an old idea. And so if I want to pay you something or sort of kind of pretend pay you something, I can waste a bunch of electricity and prove to you that I wasted that electricity as like an anti spam thing or something like that. And there's a question of, hey, can we get this waste to be kind of fungible? And Hashcash was an attempt at that. And Bitcoin is really just kind of like Hashcash with this whole layer of stuff added in for to prevent inflation. So I believe I'm not intimately familiar with Hashcash, but I believe the main innovation of Bitcoin has to do with this rate at which stuff is mined and the work difficulty reset. It's kind of obfuscated under the hood, but what's really happening with this work difficulty reset that happens like every 2 weeks or so is when you're evaluating the blockchain, you look at your watch. And if the amount of rewards that are claimed in that blockchain are if the amount of rewards in that blockchain are too large for what it says on your watch, you then go ahead and reject it. So that's kind of how I believe that was the last thing that was added in Bitcoin that was not in Hashcash prior to that.
And so when exactly did you get involved with, when did you like discover Bitcoin? Tell us that like your story of how you encountered it and how you got deeper involved with it in sort of development and stuff like that.
Well, I'd heard about Bitcoin for a while, and I was really just kind of rolling my eyes at it because most of the people who are excited about Bitcoin really want to get in on a get rich quick scheme, right? They're really excited about it going up in value, and really have no idea what it actually is. I think a large majority of the people who are super excited about Bitcoin really have no functional understanding of what it even is under the hood whatsoever. So I've lived through the dot-com boom and bust, and I've seen a number of market bubbles in my day, and I really don't care about these numbers moving around. It's like caveat emptor. It might go up, it might go down. This is not a super interesting question to me which direction it's going to go. Um, but eventually, some people I know told me that there really is a crypto thing in there under the hood. There actually is something interesting that kind of does something that it claims to do. So I went and I asked some people to explain it to me, and I got kind of an explanation. I spent some time thinking about it, and then I got on the Bitcoin Wizards IRC channel. So I did some thinking about it, did a post about it, which made Greg Maxwell hate me because it caused a bunch of people to freak out. um, I posted saying, "Well, here's an attack on Bitcoin, and here's what the counter is, and the counter might already be in there." And of course, with the reading skills people have on the internet, everyone just assumed that there was this horrible attack on Bitcoin. It's like, no, the counter was already in there.
What was the specific attack?
Oh, it just has to do with this thing I was saying about how you have to like check your watch and make sure that the timestamps are right on things. It turns out that it's very, very fundamental in Bitcoin that you absolutely must reject blockchains which give timestamps that are too far in the future. And if you do that, everything's fine. It's just very fundamental to how the whole thing works. Um, so, um, so, and
Bitcoin
likewise,
wizards?
what?
You were talking about the Bitcoin wizards, I see.
Yeah. So then I got in Bitcoin Wizards, and Greg was really annoyed at me, but was willing to talk to me, and some other people there were. So we started chatting about stuff, and I started they gave me a bunch of links to things to read, and I started spending time just reading up on it and figuring things out and what's going on in it and stuff like that. I was and still do spend a lot of time shitting on everything, which I find is so funny. People actually seem to love it when I do that because even by like me showing up and acknowledging anything, I'm kind of giving legitimacy to Bitcoin as like something where there really is some real technology under there. Because if there wasn't, I wouldn't even be bothering like discussing it with anybody. Um, yeah, and it's kind of funny because Immediately when I got in the Bitcoin Wizards IRC channel, Andy Tashi sent me a link to the Bitcoin Wizards FAQ, and one of the thing in the Bitcoin Wizards FAQ was it is saying that trying to avoid energy consumption. Trying to avoid energy consumption in proof of work is not actually like a thing that works, and we got like into an argument about this. And the funny thing is the argument still isn't over and done with. That's like what all my proof of space and time stuff is all about.
Yeah, we'll get to that stuff in a little bit. But so, how deep did you get into it? Like, obviously, you were interested in the technological aspect, but did you ever end up buying any? Are you holding any, or?
I think I have like $30 worth of Bitcoin right now, and that's all I've ever had. I really don't find investing in Bitcoin like interesting. It's not something I particularly care to do.
So you don't think it's interesting for the price to go from under $1 to $1,000?
Well, I mean that's an interesting phenomenon to see happen. But a- as far as I'm concerned, what you want with Bitcoin is actual meaningful transactions to happen and actual like commerce to be like accelerated with it in some meaningful way. Simply having a, you know, just this counter whose value goes up and down a lot isn't like that super interesting to me. I mean, I've seen things explode and collapse and stuff like that many times
Well,
over
I
the
see
course
it
of my
as
life.
Yeah, but I see it sort of as like a barometer of the succession power that cypherpunks have reached. Like, look at Julian Assange and how much he's influenced politics and stuff, and Bitcoin has created, you know, tens of billions of dollars of assets. That's something, right?
I think I don't believe the market cap of Bitcoin is tens of billions right now, and also there's a big chunk of the early stuff that's untraded. So the effective market cap is a lot less. But it's hard to say what the market cap of Bitcoin is a barometer of, if anything. I really don't like these gigantic pump and dumps that are being done all the time with altcoins. I really don't like that there's electricity being burnt doing absolutely nothing that's could otherwise be contributing something of economic value to society in the process of Bitcoin mining. These are things that I don't like. And you know, the one thing I can definitely tell you for sure is all the energy that's expended in Bitcoin mining is definitely energy that's all burnt up. And the amount of energy that happens there pretty directly goes up every time the value of Bitcoin goes up. So that's an unfortunate thing that happens.
All right, well, let's shift to scaling, and you've sort of entered into the public discourse regarding core and the current path for what they see as the roadmap for scaling transactions, and the opposing Bitcoin Unlimited Classic XT people that are just trying to hard fork and increase block size. So, what is tell people where you are falling on this in this debate and why?
Oh man, the hard oh god, this thing. Um it's really weird because the hard fork partisans keep coming up with stupider and stupider proposals. Just to the point where with Bitcoin Unlimited, it's like, are you just like self parodying here? Is this like, did some troll just decide to come up with a maximally dumb idea for how to go about doing this that you guys are all advocating for now? Um, you know, uh, there are multiple things going on here. For one thing, you want the cost of nodes to be reasonable. For another, in the long run, you really want transaction costs to go up. The mining rewards are going to go down, and in order for things to function well, when that happens, you need real transaction costs. But people are very like real technologists are very actively working on ways of adding net settlement into Bitcoin and improving on the known techniques for doing that and really making it happen. And calling for something that's inevitably going to be a disaster just because you think it's simple enough to understand is just kind of like whatever.
So is this like you don't support hard forks under any circumstances, or how extreme are you in the view on hard forks?
Uh, well, you definitely shouldn't do a hard fork when you don't need one. And this idea that transaction fees going up is a horrible disaster is wrong. It's just totally wrong. It's incorrect. It's not a disaster. And I, for one, would actually be in favor of doing a soft fork to temporarily limit the block size just to make sure that the entire ecosystem was ready to handle there being a real market in transaction fees before it was absolutely necessary. This is not a terribly popular idea right now, but I think it would be great to set it up so that the block size limit would be like half of what it really is for just like 6 months or so. So that transaction fees would go up in that time, and you'd force all the wallets and everybody in the system to be able to handle the logic around having real transaction fees. And if anything, bad happened in that time, then at the end of it, the block size limit would go up again, and everyone could adjust before it was really, really necessary to have real transaction fees.
Sadly, we've this was actually a debate going back a couple years, from what I'm aware, before the actual hard cap of 1 megabyte was reached. I think like every time we reached the soft cap of 250, 500, or 750, there was a big debate about letting that happen, and pretty much in each instance, the miners just went ahead and raised it anyway.
Yeah, that's really weird behavior on their part because they actually cost themselves money by doing that. Like transaction fees make money for them, like very directly. That's more money going to miners. But I think they don't really understand the issues all that well. And there were certain people who were affiliated with Core but are now no longer who were basically outright lying to them.
But do you think that with the Chinese miners becoming so influential, and is there some the centralizations, how's this going to end? In this little game theory between the miners and core, how where are we going to be in December 2017 in terms of, are we going to have a hard fork? Are we going to have, is Segway going to probably not at the current rates, but where do you see it?
I don't know. This business of SegWit not happening is utterly bizarre. SegWit is a really, really well thought out proposal. It fixes a number of things. It dramatically improves the extension mechanisms for Bitcoin in the future, which aren't very good right now. It fixes transaction malleability, which is basically a bug in Bitcoin because the original author just didn't know any better, and he made it so that. And he made it so that transactions refer to the signatures on previous transactions rather than the actual transactions, and that created this malleability problem, which is trivial to fix if you're starting from scratch, but required some cleverness. And as this like bonus, it created and it effectively increases the sizes of blocks, which is supposedly what everyone's been campaigning for with these hard forks. So there's no like logical reason to reject segregated witness unless you're just like this math is hard, let's go shopping, which I think is some of it. um I mean, partially it just seems like it's just petty ego. It's like, people going, we demand respect, we demand to be listened to, which is like, well, this isn't about power and respect. We're trying to get engineering work done here. And
But how do you think it's going to play out in practice?
I don't like prognosticating. I just kind of my approach to dealing with these things is to just watch them for personal entertainment value. Because the world exists for my own personal entertainment. Sometimes I tell that people to people, and they start going off like They think that I'm talking about the world exists for one's own personal entertainment, and they're totally misunderstanding. The world exists for Bram's personal entertainment, not yours. I just want to make that really clear to everybody. But I'm currently just sort of watching this SegWit debacle, like with just entertainment mostly. Like I can't believe this shit going on. This is so unbelievably stupid. Um, uh, whether the miners will back off, I don't know. This proposal, which I think it might be Shinobi here who actually proposed it to begin with, of hey, why the hell do we have to listen to the miners at all? Let's just declare, just flag day on this block height. Um, we're switching on SegWit. Miners be damned. Um, that's an interesting proposal, and it might work. It might get the miners to back the fuck off. It might not. I mean, it could happen that it goes there, and then the miners immediately try and hard fork it, and then because that's a soft fork, but then we could see a hard fork happen. What is actually really a hard fork of just keeping on, happen immediately as the miners try and fight it. Um, it's a really interesting question how well that might succeed or where that might go and how far in the future it might happen. I'm sure it would be entertaining, so I'm all in favor of there being a flag. What I want out of my own personal entertainment is to see the miners continue to dig in about segregated witness and to see a flag day get set and to see the miners argue against it and to see the exchanges and wallet authors all say, see, um, the marketplaces and wallet authors all go, okay, well, we're going with this segregated witness thing happening on this flag day, and the miners go, no, we're not letting it happen, and then watch and see on the day of, with no one actually sure in advance what's going to happen, and see what happens then, because that would just be fun to watch.
So for Bram's personal entertainment, you're endorsing the user-activated soft fork proposal.
Yes, from that standpoint, I am. I mean, there's also just this thing that there's no uh, miners just like just doing core development is not the miner's job. It's really not their job. And they're sticking their nose in a place which has none of their own business. And it's really just in a way that's just going to hurt them and just hurt the ecosystem as a whole.
Fair enough. Shinobi will get in here now and let's get into some of the technical stuff that you wanted to talk about.
Alright, well, I guess to start off for some of the non-technical people here, you want to maybe break down like what a UTXO commitment is, I guess, and then how you would organize that with a data structure like your Merkle set.
Oh yeah, sure. So in Bitcoin, it's very easy to demonstrate that a particular transaction got committed in the past, and that a UTXO did at one point exist. That can be done with this secure hash-based thing called the blockchain. You might have heard of. Um, it's not so easy to prove that something is still spendable, right? And that's kind of annoying because Bitcoin is. I mean, all it really is a glorified anti-double spending database. Uh, so, and someone has to basically have the entire blockchain in order to be able to know for sure uh, that a particular thing hasn't been spent yet, or have everything after the point when it was created in the first place. So it would be really nice to be able to add information to block headers that was a summary of the entire current outstanding UTXO set, um, and and then be able to generate short proofs that a particular thing hasn't been spent yet, so that like nodes could accept it, and you could make short proofs that a block as a whole is valid. This would just be a really good thing to have in general. Lots of people have had this idea. It has some performance issues. One of the performance issues is latency for updating things. That's pretty easy to deal with. You just make it so that the UTXO commitment trails by a couple blocks, and you have other other commitments for just the current block and the deltas. So someone can take the UTXO set from a few blocks back plus the last couple things and use that information. But you have these bigger issues that aside from the latency, the throughput of it is problematic. You really want full nodes to be able to pretty cheaply validate this as it's going, and you really ideally want it to be that it's cheap enough to validate the whole thing, that even if there's years worth of history, it doesn't take all that long to validate all of that history. Um, so the problem here, this is actually really interesting from a computer science standpoint. The problem here is one of cache coherence. You can make just a Merkle set of the current outstanding UTXOs, uh, but um, the big the big problem with it is um, that this, if you implement it naively, you've just smeared data all over memory. Trees are by nature very, very bad for cache coherence. And memory, computer memory, has this property that if you're like looking up things that are near each other in memory, it's relatively cheap. But if you're looking things up all over the place, that gets very expensive, and the computer winds up spending basically all of its time just sitting there waiting for memory. And that's actually the whole point behind like Cuckoo and Equihash, is to make the memory hard and make you have to sit around waiting for memory, is the whole idea behind those, which they do fairly successfully. So I endeavored. I thought this would be a fun little project. It turned out to be a bigger project than I thought. I endeavored to go, okay, I'm going to make an implementation here that has good cache coherent properties, so it can actually perform quite well. And I believe I've done that, but my reference implementation is in Python. And in order to really be validated, it has to be ported to C and fine-tuned and optimized so we can find out how well it really performs on real hardware. Cache coherence is the strange and mysterious thing where it's kind of hard to guess in advance without running the experiment itself. But I have, over the last year and a half, built this Merkle set. There's a reference implementation of it that's really, really simple. So the specification of the format is straightforward, and one can use a very simple reference implementation if one wants. And I also made this more sophisticated implementation that should be much more performant once it's ported to C.
Okay, so just like one thing I think some people like might not be a little clear on is like exactly how you order like UTXOs in the Merkle set to keep the work on maintaining like the tip and like recently active UTXOs a little streamlined.
Oh yeah, well that wound up so I posted about this on Bitcoin devs, and the discussion wound up getting sidetracked quite a bit on this possible improvement to it. The way I've implemented it is just a straight up like naive Merkle set, where it just stores things by hash and it doesn't know what they are. I meant for this to have extremely broad applicability and be the most simple, lowest common denominator API possible. So I'm just assuming that you just like take whatever information is necessary to specify a UTXO and hash it and use that as its position in the set. You can get some performance improvements by instead of saying, well, we're going to store secure hashes, you say, well, we're going to store things that are shorter than secure hashes, right? So what we're going to do is just make a list of all transaction outputs that have ever happened. And, the first one is 0, next is 1, then 2, 3, 4, and so on. And that number is going to be the specification of that UTXO. And so we're going to store a set of those things. Those things are smaller than complete hashes. Because they're smaller, you can compress the data structure down more. You wind up having to do fewer hashing operations, less lookups, blah, 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 blah. There's some small but meaningful constant factor improvement that possibly could be done there. That could also have some advantages in that more recent stuff is the stuff that gets updated a lot more. And so if a bunch of things from the very last block all get updated together, they're going to share a lot more information closer up the tree, and it's going to be less updating for each of them individually. I think that's actually a relatively small part of the potential performance improvements that it gets. Uh, and it absolutely would not be worth doing if that was the only performance advantage you got from adding that optimization to it. But because those things are smaller, that might actually make it worth doing. But I wouldn't implement it as something that's completely customized towards Bitcoin specifically. Personally, in terms of how to do that, I would go ahead and implement it as something that's has the API that it stores numbers, that it stores, what it expects to be small numbers and reasonably dense numbers, and uses that information to compact down what it's doing a lot. But that's further optimizations down the line. I think that optimization will get you a lot less of a performance boost for a lot more complexity than the things that I've already gone ahead and done.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a big part of the design, pretty much how the design informs speed and updating and checking things. How exactly? Or hold on a minute, I'm kind of fucking tongue-tying myself. Like, how exactly would you kind of break this down in terms of like trust models as far as implementing it, and like what's the, like, depending on the trust trade-off, like if you were using a centralized group like the miners to checkpoint it versus like more localized webs of trust, where do you see like a safe frequency in between checkpoints? And then over time, as the UTXO set really grows, a big part of the efficiency of this is the level or the depth level of the tree. Like, what kind of orders of growth do you think we'd need to see in the UTXO set to really see increases in the resources needed to update and like check the tree?
Well, the good news is because the depth of the tree is logarithmic, the resources necessary to update it really don't go up all that much over time as it gets bigger. The thing that does go up as the size of it gets bigger is the number of it is the number of things in the UTXO set requires more memory to be used up. But thankfully, that's in the tens of millions, I believe, right now. So a really small amount currently, and even if it got 10 times as big, that wouldn't be a big deal for the vast majority of machines that run full nodes. So really, the issue is just a matter of getting the actual computational resources to do the updating down to being very small. And if it can be made very small at the current scale, it'll probably be fine going up in the future. Although, in some sense, what I've done is kind of, hopefully, is just like massive overkill. Um, because it's really meant for potentially things that are much much bigger than Bitcoin. All the permissioned blockchains that people have and things like that. It might be very useful as just like a standard for how you do Merkle sets in those things that in a way that really performs. Oh, and in terms of how frequently to do this, I think every block. I think you really want to have, you really want to have it. Like I said, you want to trail by a few blocks, like 3 or something. But you really want to have that new updated Merkle root in every single block. And make it. You'd ideally want to soft fork it in, so it's a requirement of making a block that it have an accurate one of those. Um, that you have an accurate one of those in place. There could be another optimization that it only gets updated like once a week or something, like once a week or every couple hundred blocks. There's an update of the Merkle root, and then like every single block, there's just the updates for that block, and then every 100 blocks, there's the updates for the last 100, and that would be smaller. Um, That would also be another performance optimization. But a theme here is that a bunch of these things are much, much more complicated. And the point to what I've built so far is that it's really, really simple, like extremely simple in terms of the underlying semantics of what it does. And I've done a bunch of clever things to implement it efficiently, but not fundamentally changed what the API is and how it works to require any particularly special tooling.
Okay, well then, to steer a little bit away from some of the technical specifics, like you said, this is kind of something people have been thinking about and considering for a long time. And from my understanding, one of the biggest problems with it is like the trust issue. Like most of the proposals I've seen like involve miners essentially committing to a UTXO commitment. And the problem I see with this is it kind of introduces like a new trust factor into the entire model if you're going to depend on these UTXO sets to pretty much catch up to the present state of the UTXO set. And like I've seen a couple different proposals, like miners doing it individually, or let's say a series of miners having to concurrently checkpoint at like a UTXO commitment at the same state to see that it's like the same from different groups. And I've also heard some ideas about potentially just removing miners from this like altogether. Like an individual could potentially compute this and then include it in the chain with an op return transaction. And you could just have redundant like user created checkpoints with their own webs of trust here. So like what are your thoughts on like the kind of different ways you could actually implement this and like the trade-offs in the trust models as well as like the cost it would have cumulatively for the network as a whole?
I think the best way to do it would just in terms of I think the best way to do it would be to make it so that it's just included in blocks in the basic information in blocks. What happens there is if it's soft forked in, then if it's bad information, if someone puts the information there and it's wrong, it just gets invalidated. Like that block gets orphaned and isn't around anymore. And it's not really any different than you like trusting a block that you got from a miner to not have any like double spends in it, right? It's basically the same kind of threat model for that. Um, so I think that's the right way to do it. The main problem is it involves miners actually do something, right? And we have this problem now of an awful lot of miners are mining by are actually doing like SPV mining, which is like, oh my god, what are you doing? That's a really bad idea. And there was a hiccup where Bitcoin Unlimited almost kicked in due to a bug the other day, and it looks like we got a little lucky that it got orphaned immediately because apparently like a majority of miners were actually doing SPV mining, and it was more likely actually that there would have been this just massive runaway fork that was invalid that would have happened because it wasn't being checked properly.
Hmm. Yes, it is. All right, well then, I guess let's get into like a little bit of the functionality aside from fully validating nodes. Like, how could this be used to help SPV wallets or like lighter clients to maintain a higher degree of security? And like, I believe that. Do you agree that this could be a huge part of moving towards implementing a fraud-proof like system as Satoshi originally intended?
There are lots of things that could be fraud proofs on, and you can get into some really crazy stuff, like with like Stark. It actually would be not totally impossible to start adding Stark proofs to blocks. So that you could actually show the validity of blocks using super fancy crypto trickery, basically showing, hey, look, I ran this program that validated the block history and it said it's okay. And here's my proof of it that you can validate quickly, even without running the entire thing. That is looking in principle doable, actually. But even without that, if you have UTXO commitments in blocks, this makes it so that if like you give me a transaction where you're paying me something, you can pretty easily send me a proof that at least on the main chain up to the current time, it's not a double spend, and that's just a good thing to have.
Alrighty then. Well, I think we've kind of plumbed over the meat of this subject. You want to move on to your proofs of time and space idea?
Yeah, sure. Unless people want to hear my thoughts on how transaction fees should be set.
Okay, well, I was thinking the presentation that you just did, I forget which conference it was at. I think like if you broke down things about proof of storage first a little bit and explained that, and then the problems with that proof of time would kind of help solve, and you can kind of segue like that so everybody can kind of digest it.
Yeah, yeah. The advantages to proofs of storage are actually Uh, they're like kind of economic in nature. They're actually very non-technical. How to do proofs of storage is extremely technical, but the argument for it isn't very technical at all. So you have this problem that you fundamentally must have some kind of proof of something in Bitcoin. You can make a proof that you can't do Bitcoin, but there's obviously something wrong in the proof, or we wouldn't have Bitcoin. It turns out the thing that's wrong in the proof is it doesn't take into account. It doesn't take into account computational complexity. So you can have proofs of work. And if you have proofs of work, you can make a very secure, extremely distributed database. If you try and play a game with what these proofs of work are, you wind up doing this kind of like um, you kind of wind up doing this game of whack-a-mole. And I actually gave a talk at Bitcoin Devs in San Francisco, which is on YouTube, where I was actually arguing the opposite side of this. I was talking about how totally impossible it is to remove the waste from Bitcoin and going over all the different possible options and how they all fail miserably. Um, and at the end of that, I was like, well, there's this one thing that maybe with some other people's ideas and my ideas and improving it more, maybe it could work. And that's proofs of storage. Fundamentally, any proof of work that you come up with, the gating factor is going to be power. Someone's going to have to burn electricity, and whoever has the cheapest source of electricity is going to be the person who's doing all of this. And that's really just completely unavoidable. There's only one possible exception to this, which is you need to have something that can be done which requires some kind of resources but literally burns no power at all, or some amount of power that's just like completely de minimis. And there does exist such a resource. It's called storage. Like looking up storage doesn't cost anything at all, no matter how much storage you have sitting around. Storage is set as storage. You can format it once, and then it requires no ongoing power to leave it that way. And storage has a number of other really, really nice properties. In addition to not burning any power when you're doing mining, your potential security parameter is actually a lot higher because there's a huge number of uh, parties out there who have massive, ridiculous quantities of storage that they're not doing anything with yet. That they bought it in advance of doing something or in case they might want to do something with it, and have just amazing amounts of storage just sitting out there, literally doing nothing. And so, if you have a system where using storage is what gets you rewards, very, very rapidly, the amount of mining rewards are going to go down to, the alternative that people can get out of all this storage that they have out there, which is like literally nothing. People are perfectly happy leaving the storage completely unutilized out there. So it becomes completely and totally impossible to invest in buying storage in order to get mining rewards. That will be a very badly money losing proposition. On top of that, because there's so many different parties out there that are much more widely distributed, and because no one's doing new investment to make this happen, miners will inevitably be much, much more distributed than they are today in a proof of space based system where that's how you do your mining. And if anyone does want to attack the system, they basically have to pay up front for all their attacking instead of just doing a chunk today to do the attack. Um, so it really, really looks nice in terms of the security parameter being greater, it not wasting power, and it being much more distributed. It just all the economic things point to this being a great idea. Making it work, that's the devil's in the details.
Okay, and you said something about I think Spacemint was the implementation you were looking at, having one problem with a Genesis block attack if the rate that well, I guess hashing is a
Yeah, yeah,
stand-in
yeah,
word,
yeah.
power on the network.
Yeah, I can explain that. So, I'm not the only person who has this idea. Uh, so Spacemint is an implementation of proof of space using the best techniques known to date. Um, and that one has a pretty nasty problem, which is really inherent. So what you've done with storage is made it so that it doesn't cost anything to do mining. When it doesn't cost anything to do mining, someone can do a lot of mining really fast because you intentionally made it not cost anything for them to do mining. So you have this problem where uh, if the amount of mining capacity has gone up drastically over time, you can have a situation where someone's like a 10 or 20% miner today, but in the past, like 6 months ago, they might have been a like 5,000% miner just because resources have gone up so quickly. And, the equivalent has happened in Bitcoin. Like it's the amount of time it would take at the current hash rate in order to redo all of history has gotten down under like 2 months more than once. Um, so in proofs of storage, someone could, when they get into this situation, just remine since Genesis, just go all the way back to the Genesis block, just go through, regenerate everything, and make a history which is greater weight than the old one, and completely take everything over. This would be extremely bad and unpleasant of a thing to have happen. Um, so there's a question of how can you stop this? So I came up with this bright idea of alternating proofs of space and time. Oh, there's also a much more technical problem with the way Spacemint does things, in that you don't have this property that a block is just a block. Sometimes there are blocks that are like much bigger than at other times, and this is necessary for very involved technical reasons. Um, but as a result of that, people have a lot more incentive to not always mine off the very latest block. They can mine off a much older block and have some chance of like subverting all the intervening blocks. And that's something that you don't want to incentivize at all. You really, really want to avoid orphans, and particularly in a system where it doesn't cost anything to mine, someone can just keep their hopes up all the time trying to pull this stuff off. So that's something you definitely want to avoid. So I came up with this bright idea, which I only realized after doing it, after finishing working this out. I'm basically like painstakingly reconstructing all the quirks that Bitcoin has. Those quirks are there for a reason. um, I came up with this idea that you alternate proofs of space and proofs of time. So a proof of time is a sequential proof of work that's completely canonical. So anyone can do it. Any two people who do a proof of time will come up with the exact same proof of time. Um, but what happens is you make it so that there's a current work difficulty, and the and any proof of space at all can work. It's just the product of how good the proof of space is and how long the ensuing proof of time is has to meet the current work difficulty. And this makes it so you have the property that a block is a block, and it also gets rid of remining since Genesis, because while someone can go ahead and remine since Genesis, they're only capable of extending the end of their alternative history at their own work rate. And they'll never actually catch up with the current head, which is extending faster than they're capable of extending their old thing. Uh, and this this requires the slightly Rube Goldbergian setup, where there are people who are running proofs of time servers, which are like really optimized and fast, and everyone takes the best proofs of space that they know and introduces it based on the output of the last proof of time. The best ones get distributed quickly. The proofs of time servers then go ahead and run find proofs of time as quickly as they can based on the best proof of space that they know of. And multiple people are running proofs of time servers, and they're really just kind of keeping each other honest. Like if someone has a much better proof of time server than anybody else, they can run proofs of time for other people in exchange for people paying them. But since there's such a strong incentive for doing this, you're likely to have multiple proofs of time servers out there, all of them running very close to the physical limits of what you could possibly, of how quickly you could possibly do this.
Okay, so that's something I was a little unclear on when I was going through the idea. So the the proof of time isn't really counting on like just cross-checking between people and like hoping that most are like processing at the same speed. You're essentially looking for like the fastest proof of time server out there, and then kind of looking for those that meet that.
Oh, well, the idea with a proof of time is that anybody can check it quickly. That's one of the reasons why it's hard to come up with good ones. Is it has a number of requirements. It needs to be completely canonical, and it needs to be quickly checkable, and it needs to be you can only construct it sequentially with limited parallelism. Um, but the idea is you don't have everybody running the proofs of time all the time. You have proofs of time getting generated and people just check them when they get them. But there's very little resources being expended making them. There's just like a couple of very fast servers out there that are doing all the generation of proofs of time.
Okay, and you mentioned after a point, like kind of checking proofs of time at a certain point, and like I was a little uncertain like how you would go about doing that. Like, would each checkpoint essentially just be like a localized thing that you just compare against others' checkpoints, or would there actually
Oh,
be like some
well,
notarization or canonization?
no. All of this is completely canonical. So there's no signing of anything. It's just any two people who do the calculation come up with literally the exact same result. The idea is one of the ways of doing proofs of time is, well, a trivial one is just sequential hashing, right? I take the input, I hash it again, just keep doing it whatever number of times. And in the end, I have some value. This is just something that other people can check, but it's going to take them just as long to check as it took me to generate it in the first place. So a hacky but serviceable thing to do is make it so that the proofs of time is, is based on the sequential hashing, but there are checkpoints made. So I hash it a certain number of times and then go, okay, here's the value here. And then I hash it, a bunch more times and then append that value and have a bunch of these values. Right. So it could be that like this represents like 1,000 seconds worth of time, and I have 10,000 intervening hashes here. So that's one every tenth of a second. So if someone wants to check just one of these, if it's about as fast for them as it is for everybody else, which hopefully is the case, um, uh, it'll only take them a tenth of a second to check just one of them. Uh, so what people can do is they can just kind of spot check these, and then if I'm like talking to you and you send me a proof of time that's wrong and I have the one that's right, we can just compare I can just compare and see where they deviate from each other and go tell you what index number you have that's wrong, and you can go check it yourself and see that it's wrong and then believe my replacement value.
Okay, and I know you said like a lot of the arguments for the proof of time and space are mostly economic as far as making it an idea worth trying. I'm probably going to stand a little bit on Andrew's side here, but pretty much to posit a question on like a large enough scale macroeconomically, like if you had Bitcoin, say with a market cap approximating like gold or the size of the dollar or somewhere around those scales, that with the expenditure of energy for a proof of work, essentially, like I believe that you would reach an equilibrium point at a like global economic scale, where as a producer of energy, a purchaser of energy, you would essentially like be running a calculation in your head before you do anything. Is it more profitable for me to expend this energy directly mining Bitcoin in order to accumulate value, or could I make more of a profit expending that energy producing goods or services or something? And I think if you know anything about John Nash's Sound Money, that just that kind of dynamic between pretty much expending energy, securing the monetary system versus providing a good or service in order to get value that way, would essentially recreate through the equilibrium there the same kind of effect that John Nash's hypothetical industrial consumption index would, as far as providing a stable pricing mechanism instead of just letting currencies and assets pretty much just free float against each other in value. Like, how do you think proofs of time and space would play out on that kind of scale, as far as like the economics of using storage space?
Well, when you're getting into that kind of a scale, then you run into situations where people might actually start purchasing storage just to mine with it, because the total value in the system is actually much greater than the value of all the extra mining hardware that people had already out there. And that would be in some ways unfortunate. Um, Although I have to say that actually, if you compare what the side effects are, right? Like if you're doing proofs of work, which are really proofs of energy, all that's really incenting anyone to do is just burn energy. You build these like SHA-1 hashing chips. That's not super interesting. That has no side effect of subsidizing any interesting or useful research. Where if you have proofs of space, the research that's being subsidized there is you're subsidizing, storage generation, which is clearly a useful thing. And all this storage that's out there, if the mining rewards go down, all the storage can actually be used for something else. And you're getting, the economies of scale are being benefited here. And then on the proof of time side, you're like subsidizing people to do research into building gallium arsenide chips with unbelievably high clock speeds, which I have to say would be awesome. So, so your side effects are much, much better, more like kind of basic research things going on here. In either of these scenarios, like I'm a little bit cranky about the whole thing. Bitcoin is fundamentally just maintaining a database. It's not a huge database. Um, any waste that goes into generating this database is just waste. Like in principle, if we could all, if only we could all just get along. If only we could just agree on everything, then. Then there could just be a trusted database that would run this whole thing without all this waste. Um, and that's why, like, if you're willing to trust someone, it's much more convenient to use the banking system than it is to use Bitcoin. I mean, the banking system has its problems, which in some cases bizarrely make it more convenient to use Bitcoin, which is ridiculous. um, but the fact stands that waste is waste, and it's really bizarre the history of these arguments here about things that really the, the argument about value is really kind of a gold bug argument, which bizarrely enough can be traced back directly to Karl Marx. It's like the labor theory of value. It's this idea that when you mined gold, you poured blood, sweat, and tears into this mining of the gold. Therefore, it has that amount of moral value and should be treated as such rather than thinking of it in terms of supply and demand. It's kind of ironic, the history of where these ideas came from. But by and large, when it comes to Bitcoin, really all that matters is simple microeconomic theory. The cost of Bitcoin is entirely based on supply and demand, and like any good, like pork bellies or something, and that's really how its price is set.
But you wouldn't agree though that in a competitive environment, the price of a good would tend towards the cost of production? Like, mostly the argument I'm trying to make here is with Nash's sound money proposal. Pretty much the entire problem he was trying to solve was the lack of like a core foundational pricing metric for things, with the way that pretty much all like currencies and things that are used to price things just free floating in value against each other and the goods that they're pricing. And like pretty much I think where, at least where I'm coming from when I talk about the mining energy expended. Is I try to look at it in the same sense that John Nash did his industrial consumption index, which was essentially a hypothetical index of like copper, iron, aluminum, things that are consumed for like all industrial processes that you could have in a basket, and then have something else that you would control the supply of relative to the consumption of assets in those baskets to kind of maintain a stable price mechanism versus a root resource that dictates the prices of other things further down the economy. And when you look at mining and the expenditure of energy, well, unless you want to take human labor into the factor, like energy consumption is pretty much one of the root informers of the prices of anything, like how much energy was actually consumed producing something. And I think at large enough scales, when you have like that binary choice between what is more profitable, directly mining Bitcoin and attaining value that way, or like using it for a goods and service, you would kind of emulate, like, in the relative value to other things of a Bitcoin, you would emulate that shifting supply versus the industrial basket, not in terms of like actual supply, but in relative value to other things.
Well, it's definitely the case that every time the price of Bitcoin doubles, the amount of resources spent on mining it roughly doubles, basically. A little deviation from that, but that's basically what happens. Um, in a world where you can't trust banks, right? In a world where no one is trustworthy with anything, um, then maybe Bitcoin is the best you can do. And Bitcoin definitely has this property of enforcing stability via this very convoluted mechanism that requires all this mining waste. And it does do that. It's just, it would be better. It would be better to have the same level of security without all that waste. It's the security is what, the value of the security is what creates the value in the waste. It's not that the amount of waste creates the security.
Okay. Well, I guess last question I've got then is regarding the proof of time and space stuff. As far as the incentives to run time servers, are you a little concerned about the possibility of kind of the same kind of dynamic that's played out in Bitcoin playing out with a system using proof of time and space, where you essentially have most people willing to just blindly trust and leaving somebody else to run that, and pretty much at least relative to the entire user base, a centralization of the proof of time servers?
Yeah, well, proof of time servers absolutely wind up getting highly centralized, but they're very, very different in terms of what they do because a proof of time server has literally no discretion at all. They literally make no decisions whatsoever. They get an input, they perform a canonical calculation where anyone else doing the calculation on that input will come up with the exact same output, and then they generate the output. And the only thing they can do is do it faster than other people can. So they can kind of leverage the fact that they can do it faster to go, oh well, if you do these things that I want, then I'll do it for you, and I'm faster than other people. So that could be something that happens, and that could have some destabilizing effects if someone winds up making a proof of time server that's 10 times as fast as everybody else's, much like if someone makes a Bitcoin mining chip that uses 10 times less energy than everybody else does, it can be very destabilizing. But the amount of leverage that whoever does that has is much, much less. And also, there's likely to be a few of them competing with each other if someone actually can get money leveraging this thing, and that's going to further reduce the amount of discretionary leverage that they have in terms of just deciding what to operate their servers on. And they're all going to be running up against like fundamental limits of how fast things can go. And it's not like in Bitcoin where there's these sources of cheap power and you can, someone latches onto one of these sources of cheap power. uh, the example from Venezuela would seem to indicate that the absolute cheapest is where you're just not paying for it at all. That's a great that's a great way to make money. Um, the um, there's these sources of power in the world that are very cheap and only are in certain places. But time passes at the exact same rate everywhere. You can't make it faster for you because you have a better environment than someone else does. So the kind of weird things that can happen due to differences in hardware with proofs of time are really not on the same scale as happens with Bitcoin mining. And in terms of the proofs of space, space is space. It's totally and utterly not acyclical. There's nothing whatsoever you can do that's not within the core requirements of proofs of space to begin with to make it better. Other than maybe like having a higher error rate in your storage is more acceptable than it would be otherwise. But other than that, storage is completely and totally commodity.
So when talking about these alternate value generation or proofing mechanisms, the natural thought then is okay. Shitcoins. Are you in any way like promoting some kind of shitcoin that is using this proof of time, proof of space, or what's the end? What's the goal with this idea to get it into Bitcoin or into a shitcoin?
Well, I wouldn't want to call it a shitcoin if I make one. It really can't be retrofitted into Bitcoin. It's just a fundamentally different thing than what Bitcoin is. I mean, you could, in principle, there's this ridiculous thing you could do where you add in an additional type of work to Bitcoin proper, and you make it so that mining Bitcoin requires both the new and the old types of thing. And then you make it so that over time, the old style thing must go down. So you wind up having these blocks over time with just some trivial partial hash collision in them that requires no resources whatsoever to do. And all the real work is in this alternative new thing that got soft forked in. That in principle is doable. Given the current politics, I'm not expecting it to happen at all. I think given the disaster in Bitcoin right now, there may be an opportunity for there to be, an alternative coin with just better governance. And, the better distribution in this might really work well for that. And if you're starting over, there's certain very simple things you can do. You make it so that everything is pay to script hash. You make it so that every signature is Schnorr. You make it so you have segregated witness from the get go. You just rip out all the legacy stuff from it. But that's kind of a logical progression of where to go with this. I mean, if the it's not there yet. Like I keep saying, the underlying technology is still being worked on. It's not functional today. Um, uh, or not at a point where I'm comfortable rolling it out, shall we say, today. Um, if the broader Bitcoin community as a whole decided, hey, this is a great idea, let's switch to this, I think that would be great. I don't anticipate that happening, but I don't know, maybe it could.
So, regarding the existing alternative, if you want to be using the politically correct term, alternative cryptocurrency, are any of them intriguing to you? Like, for example, we had Fluffy Pony from Monero project on here a couple months ago. Um, a lot of people like smart contracts and Ethereum. I'm not sure how you feel about that, but what are your thoughts?
Um, yeah, so there's a very short list of altcoins that actually do anything interesting at all. The thing I like saying is if you want to see if a an altcoin is serious about their underlying engineering, see if they went and fixed segregated witness right off the get-go. Because that was basically just a bug, and it's utterly trivial to fix if you do it right from the very beginning. And I think like Sia coin might be the only one that actually does it. Um, the vast majority of altcoins have no engineering or anything even vaguely interesting in them whatsoever. There are a few things that are interesting. The kind of smart contracts that Sia coin enables are pretty neat, which is proofs of continuing to have something where you use blocks as a beacon for this. That's pretty neat. Monero and Zcash have some nice anonymity properties, with Zcash being a lot more heavyweight than Moneros are. Um, trying to think if there's anything else right now. Ethereum. Ethereum is kind of a shit show just in terms of how it's being run generally. And I don't like that approach to trying to build smart contracts at all. I think it's based on naive assumptions about what's actually useful for smart contracts. And if you go over smart contracts that people have built, it's a different set of things that you want to do and a whole different approach to how do you compactly and efficiently support the smart contracts people have actually proposed that actually make sense, instead of just assuming, oh, we'll just build in, we'll make it so you can script it in JavaScript and it'll support everything. And it's like, well, no, that's not really a good way of doing it, and the whole approach to governance in Ethereum is just a disaster.
So, but smart contracts in general, you don't seem as that skeptical of the whole idea. You think it's actually a worthwhile endeavor in general.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a good idea from a research standpoint, and there are certain smart contracts that actually do particular things that really do make sense. Atomic swaps are, the canonical example of one. Lightning Network is, basically based on some very simple smart contracts, just for allowing net settlement to be done. There's some things where it's like, hey, what if we want to do a lottery? How do we do that? That's a really interesting problem. Um, yeah, the Sia coin one is another interesting thing, based on some new inputs. So there are a couple of these, some of which, like atomic swaps and Lightning, I think are already important or are about to become important. And then there's this general question of how do you make more of them in the future? What will be necessary to do this? And I think that's a really interesting question. And Andrew Miller has some recent work on like how to do lotteries better and how to do things like Lightning Network better that I really need to read through. That's all really interesting stuff. There are these caveats with smart contracts that you really don't want to support dollar auctions, supporting dollar auctions, and just like things that involve covenants in general is generally speaking a bad idea. A dollar auction, for those who don't know, is an auction where I put up a dollar for auction, and the rules of the auction are whoever puts in the most money wins the dollar. And like at the end of like a week or something, whoever's put up the most money wins the dollar, and all the other money for everyone who didn't win, that all goes to me. um, this has incredibly gnarly, unpleasant incentives to it, and it is sort of a bad thing to support. Unfortunately, a lot of what you want out of it very closely resembles vaults, and vaults actually are a good thing you want to support. So that to me, in terms of having covenants at all, vaults are the kind of the thing where it's like, okay, this general kind of functionality makes sense here. But I'm not. I'm a little leery of covenants in general because they can wind up making bad things happen, and I don't like Ethereum's approach to doing it. I think it would be better to do something that's a little more like Bitcoin style scripts, plus some extra functionality of some kind, rather than something that looks like JavaScript trying to do smart contracts.
Yeah, I mean the DAO was. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that in terms of trying to have a roll out like a symbol of smart contracts or autonomous or whatever the hell.
The DAO was the DAO was such a disaster on so many levels. They actually kind of rescued themselves from a number of disasters which were about to happen. First off, because of the rules of a quorum that they had, there was no way they could possibly achieve a quorum. So all the cash in the DAO was just going to sit there, never accomplishing anything, which was also would have been a good thing for them, because if it had started actually doing investments, everyone involved would have gone and gotten arrested for trading an unlicensed security. So everything about the DAO was wrong, and they kind of rescued themselves by the horrible script that they had, and then they did the world a favor by demonstrating what a bad idea trying to do hard forks is as a result of that. Um, yeah, actually, the screw up in the DAO was kind of an interesting one. I wrote an essay called "Clean Up Your State," which didn't directly reference the DAO. It's just like, hey, look, guys, when you're writing a program, here's how you write a program, which is, you have a function, it does stuff, it modifies things. If it does any callouts, it should finish modifying all the things that it modifies before doing its callouts, or bad things can happen. And here's an example of, maybe if you transfer funds from point A to point B, you need to do your notifications outside that the thing happened after you do both the deletion and the addition, uh, or both the addition and the deletion, or very bad things can happen because then the call out can call you back and blah blah blah. All kinds of bad things can happen there. Thankfully, no one would be idiotic enough to do this with real money because God, that would be stupid.
Yeah, right. I mean the fact that they also bailed or did the hard fork basically to bail out the people who made the shitty investment. Like, it's the engineering side is one thing, but also just the political aspect of like basically cronyism in crypto, like crony crypto, which is what we're trying to avoid with all of this, really. But then they totally do exactly what you would see on Wall Street in the same kind of mentality.
Yeah, yeah. It really calls into question why you're even bothering with a cryptocurrency whatsoever if you're going to say, well, we're just going to make it so we can change things however we feel like, and because we're good guys, everyone will go along with us. And it's like, well, what's the point of having a cryptocurrency if you're going to try and be that way?
Exactly. So along the lines of politics, I'll ask one more question, kind of out of left field, and then we'll open it up to the other guys in here and see if they have any interesting additional things. But since we're getting a little bit into politics, I was wondering from a cypherpunk perspective, or whatever your philosophy in general with regarding President Donald Trump, and whether or not it's like, are you an accelerationist? Do you think it's like helping to bring the system down faster, or where do you sit with Trump?
Oh, I wrote an essay about this that I think hit that I was hoping would go viral, and it like hardly got any pickup at all. And I think it was because it just cut a little too close to home. And basically, what I was saying is, uh, Donald Trump is an example um, of picking leaders based on prejudice and superstition, right? Like somewhere deep in the human primate brain, there's this idea that the alpha male of the tribe, because we humans are tribal animals, that the alpha male of the tribe is a tall, pompous guy who radiates confidence. And that's the kind of person you want to have in charge. And this is just complete prejudice and superstition. There's zero evidence that people like this are any better at being leaders. Um, and it's this kind of ridiculous primal thing which causes people to think, oh, Donald Trump is this great leader. Um, and the thing is, this is not a new phenomenon. This is what, like, basically the entire management consulting industry has been selling for decades. This is all they do. Is they come in and appeal to people's prejudice and superstition about the kind of people you want in charge, and use this to get paid lots and lots of money for no particular expertise to bullshit their way through telling you how to run your business.
But what about in terms of the system and what the shock he's bringing to the system, and or if he is at all, like from the political theory, political science aspect?
Well, it's certainly entertaining, so I'm really appreciating that. Uh, in the run up, in a year before this last election, I posted something along the lines of, "Please God, let this race be between Elizabeth Warren and Rand Paul, just for my own personal entertainment value." And I have to say, God really outperformed on entertaining Bram on this one, so I'm very pleased.
Yeah, definitely entertaining. That's for sure. All right, so I've unmuted now the rest of the room here. If anybody has any questions related to BitTorrent, crypto, whatever, for Bram Cohen, he is here now. Is your chance.
So Mimblewimble, any thoughts on it? And if you're making a shitcoin, do you want to put Mimblewimble on it?
Yeah, Mimblewimble is really, really interesting, and it's technology which is still being improved over time. And it's something which I don't have completely swapped into my brain exactly what it does right now. Um, but it does make it so that you can have these like off-chain transactions where you really are enforcing them. Uh, you really are enforcing the off-chainness, and only when things really exceed some thresholds and stuff do you have to hit the main chain with them. Uh, I would say in terms of building them into a coin, it's too early to do it today because they're still being improved too fast, and you'd want to wait a little bit to find out like how this is doing, where this is going, um, and what parts of it you have to build in order to enable stuff. I'm not entirely sure. This is like in my list of stuff to do. Is there's a couple of recent smart contracts things that I really need to read through and get a much more fleshed out opinion of that I haven't yet. I've been pretty busy. Um, there's some other things like balance blinding, right? Like, is that a good idea to put in? That one, I'd say, just barely doesn't make it currently. You get some of these things where it's like, I don't know, maybe I have to think about it some more. Um, uh, the obvious thing to do is just, if you're going to start from scratch, you just start with what's in Bitcoin today or should be in Bitcoin today, and everyone agrees on, and just remove support for all the legacy stuff. In terms of other newer stuff to do, I mean, there's a question of do you support like Sia coins inputs using blocks as beacons? Do you support um, anonymous transactions like Zcash has? These are things where I really honestly don't know, right? Like they have clear utility, they have some dangers to them, they have a lot of added complexity. Um, and I'm not really sure about it. I definitely think Mimblewimble is really great research, though, supporting great things, and it's good to support that kind of stuff in the future.
What about Lightning Network plus BitTorrent, like streaming, streaming files and then being paid to seed them?
With BitTorrent, for the most part, the uploading resources people are using are things that don't cost anything. It's resources that would be otherwise unutilized. So you don't. It doesn't make sense to pay per byte there. That's kind of a misconception that people have about how things can and should work. Um, it makes more sense to have this tit for tat that's already built into it. This tit for tat that's already built into it, which really matters when things aren't like very overseeded already. So I don't like the idea of paying for bytes from peers. That also the amounts of money that would be very small there, and it would open up really massive quantities of legal liability as well for everyone involved. So I'm not really a fan of that.
Even if the things people are sharing are not pirated.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not too keen on it. I think if you're going to have something where someone's paying for content, the amounts of that they're going to be actually paying for the content are going to be orders of magnitude greater than the cost of the bandwidth. And trying and paying for bandwidth from peers results in just yeah kind of things for very small amounts of money.
Fair enough. Sufu in the text chat wanted to know if you had any thoughts on trading bots. I don't know what specifically he meant.
Well, I do have some thoughts on trading in general. In the history of Bitcoin, by far the best way to make money on Bitcoin was to just buy it when it was cheap and hold it till today, right? Like that's the straightforward way that really makes money off of it. Um, uh, Generally speaking, you don't want humans doing trading strategies in any financial anything because whatever strategy you're following, a bot could do much, much better than you can. And Wall Street now has all this super sophisticated stuff where it's all like deep learning trained systems, blah, 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 blah. But in terms of really basic, simple strategies to use, there are and always have been two really fundamental strategies in trading that are what you always start with. One of them is pocketing the spread. You look at short term buy sell pressure and maybe across markets as well, and uh, and make it so that if too many people are jumping in to buy at once, you sell, and if too many people are jumping in to sell at once, you buy, and take advantage of this just sort of noisy stuff that's going on, which will probably just go back again. The other trading strategy is a rebalancing one. And I haven't run numbers on it, but given the ludicrous swings that Bitcoin has had, I think this would historically have worked really, really well. What you do is you take like half your assets and put them in dollars, and half of them and put them in Bitcoin. And then whenever Bitcoin goes up in value, you sell a bunch of it for dollars. And whenever Bitcoin goes down in value, you buy a bunch of it with dollars and keep it so it's always 50-50 over time. And what this does is make it so that if you have a reversion to the mean, if the price tends to go up and then go down again, or tends to go down and come back up again, but wind up where it started, every time it does these big swings and comes back to where it started, you're ahead of the game. Uh, and this tends to outperform, like you can do this between stocks and bonds. And if you can somehow magically avoid paying taxes on all these transactions switching back and forth, you'll wind up ahead of the game. And looking at the ridiculous noise in Bitcoin price histories, I think it probably would be a winning strategy there too. It wouldn't be super great right now because Bitcoin's at an all-time high. So obviously, well, I mean, it's at an all-time high, but this is sort of a reversion to the mean as well. It has been like around here before, and it dropped massively. So, like, if you had had certain holdings when it was previously at the high, and then bought all the way down, and then been selling on the way up, you'd have made some money. Now, this might not have made as much money as just holding because it's done so much going up over time. But this is, in terms of the academic literature of how one goes about doing trading, these are the basic things that you do. And both of these are things which humans probably shouldn't be doing in real time. You should have scripts set up to do them automatically.
Yeah, but we can get you. We can hook you up with. You can turn that $30 of Bitcoin, trade some 100x on exchanges, and really build that up.
I assume there are some people who have figured out weird things that happen in exchanges and have figured out ways of making money on it. Whenever you have a market, the assumption is that someone is making money, and in the process of making money, they're making the market more efficient. So they're making it that much harder for themselves and everyone else to make money at the same time. So it's sort of like the dirty little secret of the efficient market hypothesis is it's assuming that there are people out there making money in order to make the market more efficient. I assume people are doing something in Bitcoin in order to even out prices and are making money in the process. Last I checked, the price spread between different exchanges wasn't as bad as it had been in the past. Before Mt. Gox went down, there was definitely something was wrong because the prices across exchanges were way out of kilter from each other. And when that starts happening, it's time to get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an immature market with a lot of inefficiencies in general. So the efficient market hypothesis, it's a bit of a tautology. But so you're not actively trading, but you sound like you've definitely done some investigation into the topic. Why don't you give it a shot? And there's high leverage strategies you can use. There's a lot of really interesting derivatives that you can trade.
You should totally go 200x, bro. 200x.
You know what happened? I was on the math team at Stuyvesant High School in New York City, and yeah, I went to Stuyvesant High School, and I was second best on the math team in my year, and we were a relatively weak year. But anyway, point being, my natural life path would have been, and this is where most of like my classmates who were also on Matt's team went to go work on Wall Street, because you grew up in Manhattan, you're good at math, you go work on Wall Street, and you make a ton of money doing that. And I know a bunch of people who really made a ton of money doing that. And I just decided I didn't want to do that. I find working in finance kind of distasteful. I would prefer doing things that are like building real technology and actually making stuff happen, rather than just taking money away from everyone else at this silly chess game of finance.
Why would
But
you
there's an
ever
engine.
want to take money from someone else? That's the whole
There's
point of living.
there's an engineering challenge in that though, right? So it's a puzzle that needs to be solved.
There is. I just prefer to build foundational technologies that are, giving something to society. My goal is not to make money for myself. My goal is to make the world a better place.
So what is the business model then of Bitcoin Inc? If it's torrents is basically it's an open protocol, right? And it's the client, everybody can use it for free. Or what is the model?
Oh, you mean BitTorrent Inc., not Bitcoin Inc.
Did I say Bitcoin Inc? Sorry,
Yeah,
BitTorrent
you did.
Inc. Yes.
Yes. Uh, uh,
Swap faggot.
we mostly make money off of, well, it's a combination of install path monetization and ads shown in uTorrent right now. Um, and yeah, and we also have a pro client that we charge for as well. So those are our basic revenue streams. Nothing terribly sexy.
So it's not. It sounds a little malware-ish. Like if you're. So the ads are fine, I guess. The pro is fine, but you're saying that you're bundling software with it as well.
The main install path thing has always been search takeover, and that market is really going away. And we're doing ever decreasing amounts of bundling on install. And I think we might not be doing any at all right now. I'm not really sure off the top of my head.
All right. Anybody else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But I really could have made some serious dough back in the day and like shipping with some real malware had I wanted to do that. That would have been an option. And I am too ethical, unfortunately for me.
That's too bad.
So this is mainly like proof of time. Is I saw Hyperledger working on this like last year. Is this the same type of thing?
I'm not sure what you're referring to there. You're
TK,
probably
proof of elapsed time.
yeah. There's other things that the phrase proof of time can mean. I just like it more than sequential proof of work because I think that phrase is awkward and horrible. I think most likely what you're referring to there is a time stamping service, which is a different animal. It's a different crypto doodad.
Oh, they also have Poet too, which is similar to, I forget, proof of exponential time or proof of time expire. I forget.
I'm pretty sure that like the Hyperledger thing, it's kind of similar to what you were talking about, Bram. But I'm pretty sure what they do is like like a SGX or like some kind of protected environment that just hashes things and maintains like a clock. I think it does like the same kind of thing as like a one-time pass.
There are a few different things. Intel's trusted computing has timestamping on things that they do, and one of the nice things about the Bitcoin blockchain is you can do timestamping with it because it's this historical thing that everyone can kind of agree on.
Yeah, it's dependent on TEE, I believe, right?
Yeah. Do you have any like general thoughts on like any of the stuff coming out of Hyperledger, Bram? Because like in my opinion, I just see like a bunch of redundant stuff that is either not going to be very useful or just stuff that is like, well, this depends entirely on buying my Intel chip.
I'm not remembering what Hyperledger is off the top of my head. Is this the trusted computing thing from Intel, or is it referring to something else?
It's like a
Yes.
conglomerate group with like Intel, Microsoft, all the big like tech groups getting into blockchains now.
Yeah, well, I don't don't trust trusted computing at all. I just don't want to touch it. Um, I y- there's this weird thing with banks where banks are like they're like we need blockchain because blockchain is web scale or something like that. So they decide they need blockchain. They need more blockchain in their database. Um, and this doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? Like Bitcoin hands out like somewhere on the order of $1 million a day in mining rewards, and a bank is trading like trillions. Like this is not this is not a way of securing this at all. um uh but they decide they need Bitcoin, or they need blockchain. There's this term of art that I learned at the Stanford blockchain conference called permissioned blockchains. So there were people there who are making these things, and they're secure distributed databases, but they're not distributed in the sense that Bitcoin is distributed. That they're distributed in the sense that they have failover between a couple of different machines, like you've had for a long time in databases, and that's what distributed databases traditionally meant. And what's different here is they're using secure hashes. So all the entries, when they refer to all the entries, they refer to them by their secure hash. And this creates new engineering problems in terms of making the whole thing work, but also dramatically improves the auditability of the entire thing. And it's like, this is actually really great. It's vastly better than what they were doing before. However, they should have done it 20 years ago and has nothing to do with blockchains whatsoever.
Couldn't have said it better, Brian. Thank you.
Have you ever done any work for the NSA?
No, no, I don't think they would be wanting to touch the likes of me.
What do you think of Edward Snowden?
You know, it's funny that there are a few different like leaks that uh, people sort of link together, like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. And the truth of the thing is, Chelsea Manning was always kind of a nut job, and really had no business still being in the military, and had really not great motivations and a not very well thought out leak. Um, and just wasn't that important in the end. Where Edward Snowden is a completely different animal. Edward Snowden damn well knew what he was doing, and he did important leaks about pretty seriously nefarious behavior that were going on in a way that was quite ethically done and well planned out. So I think Edward Snowden is a fundamentally good and principled person who did what is basically a good thing. I'm not entirely sure I believe his story about how he had no plans of winding up in Russia, especially given what's happened since. But that's none of my business.
Bram, can I ask
Yeah,
you a
it is.
question?
Sure.
Yeah, what's happened to Lud? You know, the creator of uTorrent. Do you ever talk to him? Because like he created some of the best technology that brought the BitTorrent protocol to the mainstream, and like he could just kind of disappeared after that. I was just wondering, like, if you talk to him, or because he created some of the greatest stuff.
Uh,
I remember like BitTornado, BitComet, all those old school clients, and it's like really interesting what happened.
Well, he Liddy's I haven't spoken to him in a really long time. Liddy's like really an old school hacker. His stuff looks like old style C and can be kind of hard to maintain. But he was an early employee at Spotify and did like their original thing, which
No
has
way,
been
that's awesome.
which has been rewritten since then. But I think he did quite well from that. And I saw something recently. He was given like an honorary degree from some university near him as a result of that. But yeah, he's doing fine.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's good to know. Just that, because it's really easy to forget those sort of people. But I remember when he just came out with the first, like it was like the alpha client, and no one even trusted that client. It was really funny. I don't know. It's a bit of
Yeah,
history right there.
yeah, it was really unfortunate for me that I brought on an early engineering team that really sucked horribly and wound up having and they just didn't work out at all. And we wound up acquiring uTorrent and maintaining that. Uh, um, yeah, we're only now in the process of really finally getting off of the really old uTorrent code base.
What do you think about the general BitTorrent environment? Like it seems like seeds and just general community interaction. Like you can look at like maybe like private trackers, public trackers as well. I believe there's been kind of a decline in it. What do you think? Do you think that's just the case of let's say introductions of new technology like Netflix, where you can onboard people more quickly, or you know, it seems like the community lost a lot of focus since like what the kind of early 2000s and stuff.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot more competition from things, and so, there's a lot more. Well, I mean, there's like Facebook and that kind of stuff, and there's also all the YouTube, and also Netflix. There's a lot more just convenient things to do online in general. Also, some of the people who are getting pirated pretty bad have gotten on board with, "Hey guys, if you want to stop people from pirating your stuff, you need to make the non-pirate experience be a better experience than the pirate experience." And I don't mean in terms of its cost. I mean it needs to be a better experience, period. If someone actually has a better experience pirating it, then if they try to pay you or whatever it is that you try and have them do in order to get your stuff, then you have really no one to blame but yourself for them pirating it. So people have somewhat gotten with the program with that now. Um, but there's also just increasing competition from everything people do online. But we still have quite a bit of usage across the world.
Do you still as a person that's heavily involved, do you still want to see that protocol upgraded and move forward, or are you looking for a different general direction? Obviously, kind of the BitTorrent protocol uses RSA. Are you looking now into crypto technology to maybe like branch into a new form of technology, maybe mold those technologies together? Because I mean, it was a very powerful idea back then, and I believe like the Bitcoin sort of network and protocol. That was Satoshi was heavily influenced by that network. 100%. That was the real birth of P2P and the realization that people really kind of need and use this technology. You know what I mean?
Well, I believe you mean with RSA is Bitcoin. BitTorrent's peer protocol uses RSA, which I believe is true. The the threat model on encryption of BitTorrent's peer protocol is so pathetically weak. It doesn't really matter that much what the encryption is that it's doing. It's really guarding very low value stuff in a very weak threat model. Um, but we have been stewards of it in terms of like improving the DHT and coming up with UTP over time. And now we're going to do some stuff, probably switching to a hash root and things around switching off of SHA-1. But it's not like BitTorrent's a pretty mature thing. It was actually, reasonably mature when I first released it, in that I spent, a year and a half rewriting it over and over again to get it into a pretty good state. And it's something where what you can do is really uh, governed by the asymptotics. If you're using all available bandwidth, you're using all available bandwidth, and that's the end of that. There's nothing really more for you to do, though no big improvement on the horizon for you to have. But we're continuing to maintain it and be stewards of it. In terms of really new things, like the BitTorrent Live protocol is very new and different. Um, and I am doing stuff around cryptocurrencies.
That's cool. I think you should definitely get a coin together. Get that SHA-256 involved. 100%.
Yeah, I'm really shocked at the things that are getting blindsided by the break of SHA-1. SHA-1 was supposed to have been broken a lot longer ago than it has been. And while it's not an urgent problem for BitTorrent, it's definitely an urgent problem for Git and for Bitcoin. And it's really kind of shocking how people have just been asleep at the wheel on this issue.
Need more quantum proof algorithms. You know, if you're going for like, you know, let's say the what is it, the SHA-512 variant. You know, obviously it's kind of like, you know, on the same level, but the cost basis for the processing and stuff is a lot higher, right? So it's like, I think people should be looking way more into that algorithmic integrity. And you know, it's just, it was kind of like the same issue with the DHT stuff. Like, you know, that was happening at the start of BitTorrent with, you know, clients. I think they were pushing out DHT to different sort of peers, and then you could basically, from a private tracker context, you could then kind of scrape that data and then get involved in that network. That was like the BitComet thing. So it'd be very interesting to see the algorithmic integrity kind of reworked on the BitTorrent protocol, if it can be. I mean, I'm not really a crazy expert at it, but I followed it for probably about 7 years, and you know, I just want to say, man, I'm a huge fan of what you guys do, and you know, it's really great technology. You know, you ushered in a lot of stuff that you probably don't even understand. You know what I mean? You had a lot of influence there.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think one thing we might do with revving the protocol is do something where peers kind of authenticate to each other that they actually know the info hash before they really start handing over information at all, which shouldn't be too hard to do. That's something I need to bring up in that discussion, actually. It's unclear right now, like in terms of our rev, if it's going to be one rev, if it's multiple revs, blah, 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 blah. This is an ongoing um, uh, discussion over there. But certainly, when you're making protocols, you kind of want to make it open ended and able to work under a very wide variety of circumstances in the future and do a lot of things. That's really the goal.
All right. I guess that's everything from the rest of the group. So I want to use this time then to say thank you, Bram Cohen, for coming on, and thank you, Shinobi, for reaching out and getting him on here. And I mean, hopefully you'll warm up to trading and what we're doing and the role that we are playing in the overall crypto community. But it was great having you on.
Thanks. This
Yeah,
was a lot of
thanks
fun.
for coming.
Keep up the good work, man. We'll need you, brother.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Bram. It's great listening to you.